This tutorial is about the picker component. The picker component looks like this. You have got this scrolling things you can pick from, and this is the one picker. It can have one or two components in it. This is one component, this is another component. You could have three components or just one component. From 1 to n number of components in this picker. Then when I click on it, it'll display a message saying, do you want to do big game in Michigan? I have made selection, fishing. You want to do fishing in Mississippi. So that's what I'm after. And want to show you how to implement this picker control and find out what the user has picked, how to populate it, how to have a number of pickers, the number of components in the picker, how to populate each component, and how to get the value out of each component of what the user has selected. I'm extending the previous tutorial, and it went like this. You saw it. When I click on this button, it comes over here. When I click on this button, it goes back there. I'm using storyboards. So step number 1 is to put a drag and drop a picker view. Okay, so I gotta make it enlarge it, drag it a little bit to the right, a little bit to the up. There you go, fit it right there. Now drag a button up there. Double click it and change it to say show my selections. Now I want to connect it. So I'm going to minimize this one. I'm going to open up the assistant editor. Scroll a little bit to the right. Well, that's not the assistant editor. Click the assistant editor. View 4 underscore iPhone is the assistant editor. So I want to create a selection, an outlet for the picker. So one of the ways here is to click over there. That's what I've been actually taught you before, or demonstrated to you before. New referencing, I open up this thing right here, connections inspector. New referencing outlet. We're going to call it state game picker. Okay, so now that one has an outlet right there. Now for my button, I need an IB action. Same way, I click here, so connections inspector becomes visible. Touch up inside. I'll put it right here somewhere after my state game picker. I'm going to call it show my selections on click. So that's where we're going to handle that. Two things. The other things that I want to do, two more things is, let's hide this. Let's hide the debugger. And I want to actually open this up. Let me show you a new way. I can just control click. Control click it, Instead, this is instead of the connections inspector. I'm gonna get a data source, drag it over here onto this circle, and they'll make the connection for the data source and also for the delegate. It'll make the connection. So data source, delegate connection, we have done that. And we also new referencing outlet, just did that before. So three things to make connections. Now we got to look at the code. Again, I'm going to open up the assistant editor, and in it I'm going to make step one. Since I'm working with the picker view, I want to implement some protocols for it. So there it is. That is, let's make that a little bit bigger. Okay, so left angle, mind the left angle bracket, right angle bracket, and separate by a comma. UI picker view delegate, UI picker view data source. These are two protocols that we're gonna implement. So I type those in there. Now I jump, and then that's the .h file. This is the one that I just did that. Now I'm gonna open up the .m file for the source code. And that is telling me that I must implement these two protocols. So let's implement those protocols. And before I implement those protocols, let me go back to the data source and define two arrays, state and game, just like that. Standard, way of defining a property. On the .m side, I must synthesize state and game. And number three, in the viewDidLoad method, I'm going to initialize those arrays to have state array will have Michigan and Mississippi. I think it's 2 P's. And for the game array, I'll have two elements in that array, fishing and big game. Now, let's go to implementing those two protocols right there. Those protocols say that I must have three methods. First method is number of components in picker view. Okay, I just type it like that. And return 2, because one for state, one for game. That picker will have 2. That's what that means right there. Second method that protocols say is picker view number of rows in component. I have 2 components. Each one of the components has how many rows. Now the first one, it passes in a variable called component. So the very first one for state, I'm making a detection here. If the first one is calling, I say, return state array count. How many elements are in the state array? Otherwise, I know it's going to be the other one, game, how many elements there are in the game array. So I need to know how many arrays I got. Over here I gotta make some detection saying which one it is. Of course, the very first one component in the zero based indexed. The one on the left side was state 0. That's basically what I'm doing over here. Component equal to 0 means the state part of it. Otherwise, the game part of it. Now the third method I must implement is picker view title for row for component. So for each, we say there are 2 rows. There are, let's say it comes down to the state array right here, and it says there are 2 of them. So now the iOS is going to say come over here, fire this couple of times, each time for 1 0 and then 1 2 elements. So iOS will fire this method 2 times, each time asking, okay, give me the element at 0, give me the element in that array at 1. So that's going on over there. If component is 0, that's the state array. From the state array object at index 0, it passes in the index of the array. Now if you can get this straight, you probably got it, what's going on over here, and that's most the hardest part of understanding what the three methods, what exactly is going on over here. The iOS is going to fire this 2 times because we set it here. First time it'll say 0, and it'll say, which component is it doing it for. State 0, state 1. Then it'll stop because we already told it, how many arrays there are, 2. It'll go here and then it'll go over here, and we'll make a detection. If component is 0, the state, give me the array at 0 index, then it'll fire it again with component, state, with row equal to 1. Then we'll pull in the state array the index at row 1, which will be Mississippi. So let's fire it up and see if it works as it should so far. There we go. You see at least Michigan and Mississippi. You see this is where the picker control has 2, 0 at 0 it's the state, at 1 it has the game. So you can make your selection, and this part is working correctly. Now I'm gonna click here, and you give me an alert box saying, you picked, you wanna, in Mississippi you wanna do fishing. If I do this, it'll say, in Michigan you wanna do big game. Okay, so we saw what that method does, what this method does, and what's going on with over here, populating the individual elements in the 2 pickers. And then we have, get rid of this one. I had to do one more thing. I had to synthesize the state game picker as well, the IB outlet for the picker, so I can access it. Then when I click on the button, show my selections, when I click on it, I want to do some things right there. First of all, I want to get the integer of, for the state game, what did I pick? So we do this way, integer, we define a variable called state index to hold that. On the state game picker, I say, call a method, selected row in component, 0. And 0, remember, is the state part of it. In the state part of it, what did I pick? What is this selection? Give me the integer of it, 0 or 1. In the state game picker, the first index, the part for the game, from the, imagine the left side, 0 state, the next one on over towards the right is the game, 1. Okay, for the game, give me the index of the game index that the user has picked. Then I declare a string, selected state. Now I know the index, and I know that the options are in the state array, and they are in the same order as in the picker. So I can say, okay, at whatever the user had picked, 0, 1 or 2, give me the element in that state array. Same thing with the selected game. In the game array, give me the object at index, which one? The one that user has picked, and we got it here that way. Now I'm going to create a message based on a format. You want to placeholder in placeholder. You want to, big game or fish in which state, and then the selected game, selected index. Then I define an alert view. I allocate init with title. I don't want to care about the title right now. What the message is going to be, the one that I have created. There, delegate nil at this point. Cancel button will say yes. Other buttons nil, I don't care about it. Show it. Now when I run it, I say Michigan big game. Show my selections. You want to big game in Michigan. Well, not good English, but I'm just trying to make a point here. Fishing, you want to fishing in Michigan. You want to do fishing in in the Mississippi, probably would be good. You want to do, let's do that. You want to do fishing in Mississippi. So I can find out what the user has selected, just an example, and based on that right here you can do some things, whatever the user has selected. So there you go, the picker for you. Let's reinforce what we learned so far by having three components in that picker: state, game, and the method. Maybe the bow or gun. What will I need? I would need another array. So let's define that in the header file called method. I need to synthesize it. I need to load it. Gunbow. Well, everything has 2, 2, 2. Why don't we break that and have three components here? Bow gun or a pistol. Now I had, if the component is 0, get the state, so that's not going to be true anymore. I'm going to have to make some change over here. Else, if component is 1, what we want to return, that would be state game. I think I could copy and paste it here again and delete this all together. If component is 0, 1 or 2. There are three components, right? 0 based index, 0 state, 1 game, 2 method. Let's see if the format is right. Yeah, that's right. I need to move this up, and now, yeah, that looks right. Now I want to do the same thing over there. Let me just copy the whole thing. What's going on over here? And close it, close it, open it, close it, open it, close it. And what is it saying to me? Cannot reach the end of the void function. Is just a warning. Well, because we are getting out of it over here. So to get rid of this method, I could just say return 0. It's never going to get here, we know, because the component is either 0, 1 or 2. So it's not going to get here to line 50 ever, but it'll get rid of that warning. So now I can just copy. No. Yeah, I want to copy. Then I'm going to replace this one with that. And get rid of that. Yeah, I want that instead of that, instead of that, and state, game, and method. We should never reach that point, but there's a warning there. And then method index, state gate game picker 2. That's the method index. And that should give me selected method index, game index, method index, in with the percent at another placeholder. So since I have that placeholder, I'm gonna put in selected method for that placeholder and see what it'll do for me. See, what did I do wrong? Can anyone guess? What did I tell it? How many components there are? 2. I'm going to change it to 3. Now what will it do? There you go. You see how that works? Mississippi, big game, bow. You want to do big game in Mississippi with big game, but that's not right. Method index, state game picker, selected method game, that should be changed to method. That's why I said big game, big game. You want to do big game in Michigan with the bow. You want to do big game in Michigan with gun. There you go. So now basically you could just copy and paste this formula and change it how many components you want and what's in each one of those components. Hope this helps. One last thing. Can anyone guess? I had 3 options here, right? Gun, bow, and pistol. Where's the pistol? Why I have 2 only? Well, let's look at it. Alrighty. How many entries there are? Picker view, number of rows. How many number of rows there are in method component? Well, that's what's wrong. But I've method.count will return 3, then I should have 3. So you see, even if a slight mistake can cause, there you go, now we got all 3. So even a slight mistake can cause these problems, but there it is. A question has arisen asking me that, well, it makes no sense what's going on over here. How do I debug it? How do I understand it? And this thing is going to happen over and over again in Objective-C and iOS. Implementing, specifying protocols, implementing certain methods in those protocols. How did I know that? I knew it by looking at the documentation and sample programs. How do I debug it so I can understand? Well, one way is to put um, breakpoints. The other one is to put in nslog methods in nslog commands in there to spell it out on the log file what's going on. But making breakpoints is easy. So let's run this program and see when these methods fire, how many times, and what goes on in them. So that's one way of troubleshooting, debugging, understanding what's going on inside. Here we go. First of all, it's going to call, and iOS is doing it. It knows, you know, this protocol is being implemented. There must be a method in there. Let me call that method. Okay, iOS is doing that. Says how many number of components there are in the picker view. We say 3. What happens next? I'm going to say continue. Now it calls number of rows in component. And what's the component right now? We can see it's 0 right now. If you run it, you see it stopped again. It's saying okay. Now there were three components. So 0, then it's going to fire it 0, 1, 2, 3 times with the 0 based index 0, 1, 2. It did it for 0, now it's firing it for 1, and as I go through it I can see component is this time it's 1. So I'm gonna return, I have to understand what to do. I'm gonna have an if statement and send it. Well, if the component is 1, the array is game and how many there are in game, that's how I'm gonna tell it how many number of rows there are in component 1. Run it once more. Now it's component number 2. I have an if statement. Component is 2. I gotta make a decision over here. Okay, I'm gonna bind it to method array. So how many rows there, how many elements in method array? So I'm gonna return that. Now it knows for each one, component 1, how many arrays, how many elements does it have? Component 1, how many elements does it have? Component 2, how many elements does it have? Now it knows that, iOS knows that, and it has it somewhere in its memory. Now what? Now it's going to go back over there and call that 3 again, and it's going to repeat that one another time. Now it's going to start calling picker view title for row, and this time what's in component 0, row 0, component 0, row 0. So now I gotta make a decision right there. I gotta write the logic. If the component is 0, I gotta go to state array and pull the element at row 0, which would be Michigan. And it runs a string, so I'm gonna pull Michigan and send it back. It's gonna fire it again for component 0, row 1. That would be Mississippi. Now it's gonna fire that again. Component is 1 this time, and it's gonna fire this method again. This time component 1, row 0, component 1, row 1, and that's all there was, 0 and 1. Now it's gonna fire which one? Can somebody predict? Yeah, I think it's gonna call that, and it sure did. Component 2. So it does it one more time, and now it's gonna go back here. Component 2, integer 0, that would be gun. And I gotta write the code to pull gun out of it, make that logic. So that's up to me. It's not gonna do it by itself. I gotta have the understanding of what's going on if I'm using arrays. Component 2, row 1, component 2, row 2, 0, 1, 2. So now it's pulling pistol out this time, and now it's what's it's going to do. That's it. Now everything has been bound. So that's one way to troubleshoot and understand what these methods are doing, in what order they are getting fired in. You could, if you put in nslog files there, nslog um, method being called, number of components in the picker view. Now put one over here saying nslog method being called, picker view, number of rows in component, component equal to whatever its name is, nslog picker view, title for row for component being called, and spit out the values of the component and row. So you will see right there the same things we saw. So that's another way, using nslog files to see what methods are being called, in what sequence are they being called, and what are the values of different parameters. So I hope that helps with debugging and trying to understand what goes on behind the scene. And you will see this kind of things going on all over the iOS. Whatever component you use, there will be some protocols, there will be some methods. You're going to have to understand what those methods do and how to use them to your advantage.